Good afternoon. It's Monday, the 6th of December 2019, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. Your host today, Mike Robinson, myself, Brian Gerrish, and we're delighted to be joined by David Scott. Of course, David reporting north of the border with northern exposure.
Well, Brian, it was very interesting. On Wednesday, we obviously covered NATO and the leaders' meeting. But while we were on the news, in fact, at 7 minutes past 1, the London Declaration came out, which was a declaration that they made. And the timing of that was a little surprising. We were expecting there to be more press conferences in the afternoon and the London Declaration being published at the end. But it seems that Mr. Trump was a little bit upset about the video clip that many people will have seen of Trudeau and Boris Johnson and Macron appearing to make fun of him. So there seems to have been some kind of spat in the afternoon, and he ran off early. He tweeted out that, well, you know, there would be no press conference in the afternoon because they'd done so many press conferences already and they'd had such a great time together and all this kind of stuff. So reading the words of the declaration, it was all putting everything, a positive spin on the whole thing. I don't think that was quite how it ended up. But almost immediately after the NATO conference, the chief of the defence staff, General Sir Nick Carter, was giving his presentation at RUSI. This is an annual event. Well, he had some quite interesting things to say. So let's just, there he is, General Sir Nick Carter. Let's just briefly run through what he had to say. Bit like the NATO conference, Russia, China, these were the focuses of at least some parts of his discussion. He seems to agree with Stoltenberg that Russia and China remain the threat. Yemen and Libya, he's particularly concerned about as well. And perhaps unsurprisingly, the Sahel. So there's the EU agenda into his speech straight away. He said that Russian activity in the North Atlantic is it's at a post-Cold War high. I think we've allowed that to happen, haven't we, Brian?
Absolutely. I was speaking to a senior retired, an admiral, in fact, a few days ago, and he said that all of our, we'll call it good work, the military work to secure the North Atlantic, which had been achieved by the end of the 80s, very early 90s, all of that just given away in the defence cut. So remarkable that we got this ping pong act going. The Russians are a threat. No, they're not. Yes, they are. And we're now in this mess.
Absolutely, but then it started to get a little bit more interesting. Our own media has a really important role to play in setting up a well-informed public debate. Is that, what's he saying there, propaganda?
Propaganda. We need to get the propaganda rolling so that we can have the UK public on side with policy.
Okay, excellent. And well, political warfare is war by other means.
And interesting that we have a military man getting involved in politics, because of course the rule is that servicemen and women do not get directly involved in politics. But now we've got a political army, and of course this is the man who was sat down in yet another cosy briefing with the EU a couple of weeks ago. We tweeted that out and said he was there pursuing EU defence union.
Absolutely, but of course he didn't just make this statement. He quoted Edward Lucas. So what we're getting here is Absolute Integrity Initiative, Institute for Statecraft propaganda being pumped out by General Sir Nick Carter. He quotes Edward Lucas. He's saying, as Edward Lucas puts it in his commentary on this strategic culture in the West is characterized by a sharp distinction between peace and war, with little scope for active conflict in between. In this Western conception, there's scope for debates, disputes, demands, tensions, and major geostrategic contests without compromising the fundamentals of peace. All take place without compromising. Sorry, there's duplication in the transcript there, it seems. War only occurs when formal and informal armed forces engage each other using kinetic force. But then he goes on to quote, Lucas is saying, these regimes, by contrast, view the strategic landscape as characterized by a continuous and never-ending struggle that encompasses everything from what the West calls peace to nuclear war. So maybe bring David in at this point. We've heard this rhetoric before. We're living in the grey zone. There is no difference between peace and war. Where does this actually take us?
Well, right back to the Integrity Initiative. and CND, Chris Donnelly. And this whole idea that everything is warfare. So everything has to be manipulated by the state, and everything has to be attacked in the opposing country. There is nothing, no cultural item, no religious item, nothing, and no part of your society is not included in warfare, and therefore no part of your society is not included in the interest of the state and the control of the state and centralizing power to harness the whole of the people in this new version of total war. And I would just like to know, can either of you tell me what political warfare actually means?
Well, I have to smile while saying this. I would suggest that it's the whole world needs to adopt the Western view of how they should be living and running their countries. And if you don't, we're going to come and bomb you. That's roughly how it works in political warfare. Our way or no way.
No, that can't be right. That can't be right, because we're talking about non-kinetic, right? We're talking about before the bombs start falling. We're talking about something else.
But these aren't necessarily kinetic bombs. They could be cyber bombs, or they could be propaganda bombs. There's a whole raft of different bombs that could be deployed here.
I still don't understand what the difference between political warfare and politics actually is.
There may not be any, but let's continue with this then. He said that this requires a fusion approach. All this requires a strategic response that integrates all of the levers of national power, a fusion approach that brings coherence and consistency to our UK strategy. Our new UK Strategic Command, which formally stands up next week as the successor to Joint Forces Command, is charged with driving the essential integration across the modernised force to achieve multi-domain effect. So, this is perpetual war in every possible domain, including the so-called grey zone. Well, there's no limits to it, apparently.
No limits. And the moment he's talking fusion, of course, he's talking about bringing the UK public into the arena of a potential enemy to the government policy, which is why we've now got a military unit, 77 brigades, specifically set up not only apparently to monitor the Russians, but also the British public.
Absolutely. And he said that NATO is turning its mind effectively to the challenges of the future, including China's space, cyber, hybrid warfare, subversion, disinformation, and new technologies. I'm not clear that there's anything being left out there.
Mike, I look at this and I am really lost for words, because here is this general standing up and warning about China again, but we're bringing China into this country to handle strategic power infrastructure, nuclear power stations being put in the Chinese domain, 5G, and of course the Chinese buying up a huge amount of UK at the moment, but he's not bothered about that.
Oh, but he is, because of course this is the core of the NATO argument, because France and Germany are absolutely for building bridges with Russia. They're not mentioning China at this point, but by implication it goes that way, and they're certainly not concerned about the amount of strategic infrastructure being bought up by China at the moment. Stoltenberg and some others, perhaps clearly including Nick Carter here, taking the other view. So there is definitely a fight going on over this issue.
Yeah, which suggests to me, Mike, that the whole thing is being fabricated, so we can't get a true response, because the whole premise of this so-called defence policy, whether it comes in from NATO or the EU, is based on fiction.
David, we've got to move on. Have you got any final thoughts on this?
No, let's move on. Peace is war. We've
got there, haven't we?
We're absolutely there. Okay. Well, now on Monday, I believe it was, Nigel Farage was appearing on 5 Live with Nikki
Yes.
Campbell. Apologies. Yes, Nikki Campbell. Well, we pushed out a little video clip on Twitter yesterday about this. About something that was said during that interview. So just have a listen to this. Now, if you're listening to this on the audio only podcast, we'll give a little bit of explanation afterwards. It may not be clear, but just hold on.
The EU is a prototype for a new world order. New world order is the key phrase.
Yeah,
that is a well-known anti-Semitic trope.
Nothing to do with the Jewish religion whatsoever.
It's a well-known anti-Semitic trope.
Not that I've ever heard. It is a big idea, a new world order, where diverse nations are drawn together in common cause.
I think a new world order is emerging, and with it the foundations of a new and progressive era of international cooperation.
Out of it came a new Europe, a new world order, a new consensus.
That liberal democracy would triumph, that free market economics would slowly progress, and we'd have a new world order.
So look, for those that are just listening on the podcast, what we were asking there was, you know, is each one of those people that used the term, each one of those politicians that used the term in the past, are they to be viewed as anti-Semites from now on? That seemed to be the implication. Now, Nicky Campbell responded on Twitter and said, well, actually, no, it was the context. You got to take it in context, because Farage was appearing on the Alex Jones show when he made this comment. So it's that type of new world order you've got to look at, not the international relations version of the term, and that type is an anti-Semitic trope. So David, this is quite a spectacular response from Nicky Campbell, because it seems that, well, you tell me, what do you think it seems?
Oh, it's completely dysfunctional. So we've got point number one now in the understanding of Nicky Campbell and presumably the BBC, etc. It's not what you say, it's where you say it. That's interesting. And they now view Alex Jones and presumably anyone outside the mainstream as inherently toxic, and assume that when they say words like New World Order, they mean something different from what George Herbert Walker Bush meant when he said it. And this is not the case. They're talking about it because George Bush said it, because the people at the very head of the political tree are using this term and defining it as something that's guiding where our countries are going. And then to question that, to start to drill down into what a new world order is, then you get some uninformed numpty in the BBC calling you an anti-Semite. It's really astounding. I really think actually he owes Nigel Farage a huge apology, because that's just trying to tar someone's reputation without any evidence, without any justification, and presumably for some sort of political effect.
Well, that's how it came across to me. Now, his argument was that he was then asking the question, what would have happened if Jeremy Corbyn had made the statements that Farage had made? And of course, he was trying to justify what was to me an attack on Farage by putting it in those terms, in that context. But it seems to me, David, that of course what he's ironically pointing out is that Jeremy Corbyn is also subject to these types of attacks with no real justification. I mean, there's plenty to criticise Jeremy Corbyn for, but the anti-Semitism trope really isn't justified.
No, and this is the strangeness of it all. The anti-Semitism trope is working. It's been used. It's been weaponized. It's been weaponized for years for political effect and political gain, and it's extremely effective. It seems that it's becoming ever more effective, but it's becoming less and less grounded in any reality, and it's becoming more open to be manipulated.
Well, look, let's have a look at how it's not grounded in any reality, and we'll move to Scotland for this one. And this is The Guardian. Ex-SNP candidate still contesting seat after anti-Semitism case.
Yes, this is Mr. Neil Hanvey. He was dismissed from the SNP. He was standing for Kirkcaldy in Cowdenbeath. He's still standing, but he's now standing as an independent. The SNP, if you've seen the old kind of cartoon clips of people having the epaulets taken off before they're shot, we had a similar thing where all the great and the good from the SNP went into his constituency office and took all of their election brochures and paraphernalia away and removed all his little insignias and badges. So he's been ritually stripped of all SNP affiliations. but not of SNP support, because the activists on the ground are still campaigning for him. He's still standing, but he's now not SNP. If you understand, that's a distinction. Now, what was his crime? Little tricky. You see, he in some point in the past, he posted on social media something about George Soros. I think it was a cartoon, and it was a cartoon that was intending to shock, to make the point that it was regarding George Soros. And there was something else that he posted, some comment about, I think, the Israel-Palestine conflict, and these contravened the very controversial and now adopted by the Labour Party, but apparently not officially by the SNP, but clearly unofficially, IRHA definition of anti-Semitism, which is a very long definition and covers more or less everything to do with, for example, criticism of the State of Israel. And he had contravened that, and he apologised unreservedly for his terrible blunder and his insensitivity and the offence he'd caused. But that didn't save him. You see, you can't apologise your way out of these things. And he was dismissed from the SNP, but he's still standing. Now, the SNP then sent, we had to investigate this. So they organised an investigator from the sort of Central Standards Committee to go and see what was happening on the ground with all these SNP activists still supporting this notorious anti-Semite. And then cue Channel 4.
Yes, so tell us.
And Channel 4 investigated the investigator. And it transpired that the investigator had also made comments on the proposed international definition of anti-Semitism. And had also made comments regarding Israel's actions in Gaza and elsewhere. And she was also deemed to be anti-Semitic. So the investigator got convicted of the same crime she was investigating. And then the senior people in the SNP confronted her with her wrongdoing, and she resigned from the party. So here we have the lady, Denise Findlay, the anti-Semitism probe head, had to resign from the SNP over anti-Semitism. She tweeted, "I've had to resign from the SNP. There are tweets where I'm arguing that Israel equals Nazi should not be part of the definition of anti-Semitism. They were given to Channel 4." Right? Now, I would have to say, whatever your view of Israel versus equals Nazi, right, however accurate you think that is or isn't, there's a couple of facts here that we should remember. That we are not a government and they are not us. So attacking a government and a government's policy is not the same as attacking a people, and can never be, and must never be, because then attacking any government becomes impossible. And the definition of anti-Semitism is kind of like, you know it when you see it. I've come up against anti-Semitism, and it's breathtaking when you see it. And I'd have to say, in Great Britain, I've come across it exceptionally rarely. And you know it when you see it, and it is directed against anyone who's a Jew. And I don't think there was any suggestion that that's what this person or the person who's standing for election actually were doing. They've fallen foul of something else, but it's now such a toxic label that if someone points at you and says anti-Semite, then you can wave goodbye to your political career and quite possibly the day job too.
So where does that take us then? Wings over Scotland?
Now, Wings over Scotland. I never thought that this day would come where I'm quoting Wings over Scotland, but the day has come. Wings over Scotland, nationalist blogger, doesn't like me very much. I'm on his blocked list. In fact, anybody with a brain cell in Scotland is on the Wings blocked list. And you can download it as a comma separated value file and you can block all the same people. But he does have a huge following in nationalist politics. And he's talking about what's happened here. And it's very interesting. He writes, Hanvey, like Findlay, was brought down not by political opponents or the media, but by members of his own party as punishment for signing the SNP Women's Pledge. This entirely innocuous document, which has been signed by over 3,000 people, asserts the commitment to a number of uncontroversial women's rights. Now, when Wings tells me something's uncontroversial, I think I'm going to disagree. But no, they really are uncontroversial. Women have the right to discuss policies which affect them, such as the proposed self-identification of sex, without being abused or silenced. Women have the right to maintain their sex-based protections set out in the Equality Act 2010, including female-only spaces such as changing rooms, hospital wards, sanitary and sleeping accommodation, refuges, hostels and prisons. Women have the right to refuse consent to males in single-sex spaces, or males delivering intimate services to females such as washing, dressing or counselling. Women have the right to single-sex sport to ensure fairness and safety. Women have the right to organise themselves according to their sex class across a range of cultural, leisure, educational and political activities. Okay, that, and so he continues, but it's regarded with absolute toxic fury by the transgender activists within the party who view anything other than the complete unquestioning submission to the claim that trans women are women to be thought crime meriting instant expulsion. And he goes on, having failed to drive out candidates and office bearers for the crime of disputing whether women have penises or not, the trans faction changed tack last week and began scouring the social media history of offenders for content which can be misrepresented as anti-Semitic, since anti-Semitism is an issue which enjoys more widespread public traction. And Hanvey and Finlay are the first to be victimised. Actually, maybe not the first, but I actually agree with this, with Wings here, that they have been victimised. And he's not the only person saying this. Here we have another tweet. One SNP politician said there was little doubt the complaint against Hanvey was an inside job. They added this is nothing to do with genuine concerns about anti-Semitism and everything to do with support for the Women's Pledge. So you stand up for women and your political career is over. All in the name of feminism and fairness, by the way. But there we go. It's a very strange. Now, the blogger Wings Over Scotland continues, and he draws this to, I think, again, rightly, to lack of leadership. And that means Nicola Sturgeon. So he writes, and this is one of the foremost supporters of independence in Scotland, with a huge personal following. Nicola Sturgeon needs to stand down, and the sooner the better. In this site's view, there is no chance whatsoever of independence being achieved under her leadership. And to be honest, it's been some time since we believed she was even trying. And he continues here, the woke-infested SNP is a train wreck. Now, he's a little naive here because it's not woke-infested. This is cultural Marxism. This is the destruction of the country. This is the destruction of everything that holds society together, and it's intentional. And it has been imported wholesale into the SNP from its origins in America, and with certain philosophical lines such as critical theory, and the Frankfurt School being the generators of the ideas. The SNP has it, the Labour Party has it, the whole of left-wing politics has it. The SNP's got a particularly bad case, and here you see people starting to react to the manifest nonsense that it generates, where people are hounded out of public life essentially for being able to think clearly and being able to define, for example, what is a man and a woman.
So let me just ask you this. If a campaign group or a pressure group within a political party or in any other setting uses anti-Semitism as a way to attack somebody when the attack is really about a completely separate issue, is that not in itself anti-Semitic?
Well, eventually what you'll do, what will happen, I suspect, is the term will lose all meaning. Right? I said, I've come across anti-Semitism. I have. I've come across someone who had a visceral hatred for Jews, and if you had shown him a Jew, he would have directed hatred against that person across a wide spectrum and attributed all sorts of negative aspects to that person simply because of their ethnicity/religion. Right? So it does happen, but it's extremely rare. And that sort of thing is a thing which can end up getting minorities beaten up, terrorized, and having people's lives made absolutely miserable, and them driven out of countries, having all of their property stolen. You know how it goes. We've seen this tape before, but of course that's a million miles from thought control using anti-Semitism as a baseball bat to beat people with.
Yeah.
And if these things get flipped, then the protection that we want to offer to people who are genuinely vulnerable vanishes, because to offer that protection will be seen in itself as a criminal act.
Well, David, thank you very much for that analysis north of the border to show how this very dangerous ideology is spreading across the country, being spread across the country. Let's jump to Plymouth. No better place to start than the BBC, absolutely gloating here with this headline: Plymouth Labour councillor suspended over anti-Semitic comments. So let's just have a look at what this lady, Margaret Corvid, had to say. She had apparently said the Zionists have certainly controlled the discourse about Holocaust remembrance for many years and have aggressively quashed the truth about Zionist collaboration with the Nazis. She also spoke, now the linkage between these two statements isn't absolutely clear in the BBC article itself, so I've taken exactly what the BBC says. So she apparently also said, until then, Zionists will be able to marginalise and isolate alternative narratives during Holocaust Memorial Week and will use such efforts to strengthen their control of the Holocaust discourse. Now, where had these statements come from? Well, in fact, they had been dragged off her Twitter account from back in 2007, I think. So we're talking years ago, but they were dug up by this gentleman, David Collier. Now, he is simply a blogger. He calls himself Jewish. He says he's a Zionist. He says he's pro-West. And he says that rising anti-Semitism mobilized him. Balance is not a halfway between the truth and a lie. So this man set himself up as the accuser of this lady. And it's just fascinating to go onto his website and have a look at what he's talking. You'll find his accusations against this lady councillor. And he really gets stuck in. He's also after a bit of money, of course, so please donate. But he says this: these writings help challenge the revisionist narrative and expose lies and anti-Semitism. They can and do make an impact. However, intensive independent research takes considerable time and is expensive. Please consider making a donation. They really do make a difference. So I wonder, Mike, who actually has been donating to help him on his quest as the anti-Semitic witch hunter, witch finder general. BBC, though, does something very devious in this article. They spin the definition in favour of Zionism. So one sentence simply tells us what Zionism is, according to the BBC. Zionism is a Jewish nationalist movement to create and support a Jewish national state in Palestine, roughly corresponding to the historical land of Israel. Well, that's a very clean-cut definition, but it doesn't take much searching across the internet to have a look at some very interesting articles. Here's the Mail, sorry, I beg your pardon, the Mirror. And what was their headline? King David Hotel bombing killed 91 and struck at heart of British rule in Palestine. Now Prince William is staying there. On the 22nd of July 1946, Jerusalem's King David Hotel was the target for one of the most lethal terrorist attacks of the 20th century, when, quote, Zionists planted milk cans loaded with explosives in the basement, and the warnings were ignored. And the article goes on to tell you that 28 Britons, 41 Arabs and 17 Jews and 5 others died in that pretty horrific attack. So based on what we've been covering, David, you north of the border and this particular case south of the border, we have to ask, is this report on Zionism, is this actually anti-Semitic? But it gets better, because if we come to this lady who's now had to apologise, she is actually Jewish herself. So now we've got the fact that you can't even be Jewish and speak out, and she has been hammered and had to make this statement. I'm deeply sorry for the statements I made years ago, as described in David Collier's blog post. She hadn't remembered the issue with regard to perdition. Now, that was a play. I think it might also have been made into a video, which was often regarded as being deeply anti-Israel. She was apologising for her intemperate tweet, and she'd not remembered the issue with regard to perdition. Sorry, that's repeated. I beg your pardon there. So basically, two issues. This is the play perdition and the fact that she tweeted out what she did with regard to Zionism. So as a result of this immense Zionist pressure, we're not going to be able to hear the views of this Jewish lady, even though she's talking about essentially things around her own culture. So what do we make of this? Here we've got Haaretz, how Benjamin Netanyahu became a Holocaust revisionist. And in this very, very good article, it's saying, well, we're confused now as to where Mr. Netanyahu's coming from, because he was published in 2015 asserting that it had been the pro-Nazi Palestinian Grand Mufti Haj Amin al-Husseini and not the Germans who'd come up with the idea of wholesale extermination of European Jews. So now we can ask whether what Mr. Netanyahu thinks is clearly revisionist, because they're saying it is he also anti-Semitic? This is nonsense. I've got a couple more bits, David, but the more you go into this, the more you discover that what's happening here is not only extremely dangerous, the thing is ridiculous.
Yes, and Haaretz is a very good newspaper and is looking at Jewish culture and Israeli politics in a way that if we were to do it in the UK column, we would be branded anti-Semites, simply because there's actually more freedom in Israel to criticise Judaism than there is here, bizarrely. Gilad Atzmon pointed out that the origins of Zionism were extremely critical of certain aspects of Jewish culture. One quote, he says, the wealthy Jews control the world, in their hands lies the fate of governments and nations. That was a quote from Theodor Herzl, the founder of Zionism. So there's more to this than meets the eye, and we have to be able to talk about it.
More to it than meets the eye. We are talking about it. Let's just continue with this excellent Guardian article debunking the myth that anti-Zionism is anti-Semitic. All over the world, it's an alarming time to be Jewish, but conflating anti-Zionism with Jew hatred is a tragic mistake. This is a Guardian long read, and I have to say, very well argued all the way through, and that headline really says it all. So let's come back to the man who's the anti-Semite witch hunter general, David Collier, because I stumbled upon this. Now, I don't know the provenance of the lady, Jane Jackman. This is clearly a University of Exeter paper. It has all the references. You can find it easily on the internet. It's entitled Advocating Occupation, Outsourcing Zionist Propaganda in the UK. And what she is talking about and warning about is an orchestrated policy by Israel to get in amongst social media in order to hammer out the Zionist propaganda and to attack people who are challenging it. And who did I find mentioned in here but David Collier himself? And I'll introduce it. The paragraph says, to advance the Friends of Israel mission, the Israeli embassy annually invites representatives of the newest groups to London for a day's advocacy training. In November 2016, there were more than 100 representatives from new groups across the UK, the highest number to date. Besides Ambassador Regev, speakers included Israel's Deputy Foreign Minister and David Collier, a blogger under the banner heading Beyond the Great Divide. So this man he's really a professional who's closely aligned to the Israeli government. The Israeli government is using him to bring down a Plymouth councillor. This is outrageous, David.
It is. And the weapon has kind of escaped the reservation, because it's not just Israeli government policy now. It's anybody who can get a hold of that weapon can use it to unseat, silence, deplatform, and otherwise intimidate people who are saying things they find uncomfortable.
And we need to do something about it, because if we apologise and walk away, of course, these people are going to run roughshod, not over politics in this country, but over social media and freedom of speech. So it's speak out, we'll lose freedom of speech.
Absolutely. Now, a complete change of tack here. And well, as everybody knows, COP25 is going on in Madrid, or has been going on in Madrid this week. Well, we wanted to highlight this article. It's in German by Gabor Steingart. He is former editor-in-chief of Handelsblatt, and he's headlined this article, the EU, the green scam, effectively. So he's talking about various things. But really what the EU is planning to do and what the European Central Bank is planning to do to try to save the European financial system. So he's talking about the European Central Bank, the European Investment Bank, and the European Commission pursuing together a grand plan which risks and with risks and side effects that no national parliament has been informed of. Europe wants to rescue the world climate with the money printing press. And so on. So here he is. He's saying that the EU Parliament has established the climate emergency. They did it last Thursday, November the 28th. So this was written a few days ago. Everything should be subordinated to the purpose of limiting global warming below 1.5 degrees Celsius. He says the new EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen will put the ecological transition at the centre of her inauguration speech, and indeed she will. She has mentioned that several times on Twitter so far this week. The main instrument, he said, for operation on one side, the European Investment Bank in Luxembourg, led by Germany. The multilateral bank should draft, implement and finance eco projects worth €1 trillion by 2030. And in order to fund that, they're going to switch on the printing presses. And this is basically the point that he's making. He says that that this is a complete violation of European treaties, which explicitly prohibit state financing through the central bank. He says that central banks are going from bailing out banks to bailing out the climate. And he's saying that Greta Thunberg's alarmism and John Maynard Keynes' interventionism are joining hands. Is that what you think is going on, David?
Oh, that is a stunning attack on the Green movement. Greta Thunberg and John Maynard Keynes, what a combination! Yes, I think that is excellent. The idea that we're going to be printing money and that making little bits of green paper will somehow fix things is manifestly false, and the idea that all of this control, centralized control over every aspect of everyone's life, is going to save the planet from its entirely spurious, entirely fictional crisis is not only flawed, but I think it was very unwise to be launching it as we go into a northern winter, because snowfall's increasing in the northern hemisphere. The chart on that's quite interesting. And they're going to look increasingly silly as they try to persuade people from inside of a blizzard that the world's warming up and we're all doomed because of it.
Indeed, and of course, one of the key points that many environmental campaigners, I'll change that, climate change campaigners miss, is of course at the heart of this is not any real political will to do anything to clean up the environment or to reduce pollution or to deal with many of the issues that people think they're dealing with. At the heart of this is a financial scam, and that's why politics in the West is pushing so hard for this. And it's interesting that at the COP25, Antonio Guterres, the head of the United Nations, absolutely attacked India, Russia, China, the United States, the four main powers. Now, you may disagree with their economic policy, David, but of course these are the four main powers that are not following this climate agenda the way that the UK and Europe are, for example. So it was interesting that he chose those four nations to attack. But of course, those are also the four nations that aren't getting 100% on board with the financial aspect of this. And that's what's at the heart of the whole thing.
Yes, the financial companies were early on to this. Catherine Austin Fitz has identified the role that drug money plays in holding up the American stock market. And she challenged an audience at one point, said if there's a button and you could eliminate all of the drug money, all of the drug cartels, all of the drug trafficking into the United States and all of the associated harm, but bear in mind, and then she would describe the effect this would have on stock markets and pensions, who would press the button? And no one said they would press the button. Now, it may be that drugs aren't going to do it anymore. We need another narcotic, and lies about the environment may well be it.
Absolutely. Okay, now, quick advertisement. If you like what the UK Column does and you'd like to support us, then please head over to ukcolumn.org/community, where there are options for joining us there or making a donation, so on. Any support very much appreciated. And thank you very much to the people that have sent us some Christmas cards with some gifts inside.
Yeah, excellent, much appreciated, and a big boost as always.
David, let's head up north of the border then, and here is Susan Deacon, who's she's no longer Scottish Police Authority Chair. This has a ring of deja vu about it.
Yes, we were only 2 years ago, Mike. We were covering the demise of the Scottish Police Authority chairman, who had been running the Scottish Police Authority in a very totalitarian way, and there was much failure. And Susan Deacon was brought in to sort the problem, and we were somewhat sceptical, but we hoped she would be able to make some progress. And she's resigned this week. And her resignation letter is something to savor. She writes, in truth, however, I have increasingly become convinced that the governance and accountability arrangements for policing in Scotland are fundamentally flawed in structure, culture, and practice. And she goes on, it gets worse. I would suggest that the Scottish Government thinks afresh about how the police service is scrutinised and held to account, and how or if a better separation between politics and policing, and indeed between the police service and those who oversee it, can be achieved. Now, that is as thorough a demolition, as thorough a criticism of how the policing in Scotland has been run ever since Police Scotland was created, as you could ever wish to see. And I would have to say, I think much more highly of Susan Deacon, having gone in, worked at this for 2 years, concluded that the job is not doable, and made that sort of statement on the way out. And I could only say, well, thank you for being honest with us.
And perhaps we could add to that, this is exactly the sort of person that should receive support from the public, to applaud them for having the courage to stand up and say what they say. These are the people we need in the system with knowledge of the system to expose what's really going on. So if you feel like dropping her an email to say well done, I'm sure she'd appreciate it.
Yeah. Now, David, look, we're rapidly out of time, so we'll do one more thing, and then I know you want to cover Nish Kumar and the attack on him at the end. But let's just briefly mention this. A new Scottish bill to be published in January that will contain a provision for every child to have support from a trusted adult for gender identity. This doesn't sound terribly pleasant. Is this some kind of variation of the named person scheme?
Well, it's the named person scheme plus gender politics. It sounds absolutely horrendous. I can't actually find very much on it yet, but it's being planned for the start of next year. It will be called the Gender Recognition Bill or something along those lines. And we will be looking at it very, very closely. This seems like another attack on, amongst other things, womanhood.
Yes, indeed. Right. Now, look, you want to end with a little bit of coverage of the Nish Kumar incident, which we'll explain in 1 second. But before we go into that, you wanted to highlight some lyrics by Lawrence Fox.
Yes, this is Lawrence Fox has produced an album called A Grief Observed, so you can get that on Amazon or other retailers.
And we should mention that Lawrence Fox is an actor.
Yes, and A Grief Observed is also the title of a book by C.S. Lewis. I don't know what exactly whether that was an inspiration or not. And someone sent me this this clip of this song, and I was astonished with the depth of the lyrics in it. And I thought I'd just put a quick run through of a few of them here. It's called The Distance. And the lyrics go, they've put something in the water, they seek a cure for the conversation, they stole a march on your indecision. The first to follow is laughter, more on that in a minute. Just to quell the long offended, they seek to murder your opinion. And the song goes on. The light has been turned down on the edge of reason, replaced by blinding fires that burn wild across the region. And then he says, for the wrong to rule, the good must just stand idly by. Oh, how those words have resonated with me. And he concludes, so I need you more than ever. I need your hands in this resistance if we're going to go the distance. And I'd have to say, if ever there was a song that described what the UK column has been about, that's it.
Okay, so that leads us in then to the issue of bread rolls flying as comedian Nish Kumar lays into diners at charity lunch. Now this was the Lord's Taverner, is that correct? And he had attempted to make some anti-Brexit jokes and really got.
Well, I completely misjudged the audience.
Well,
completely.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Well, he did, right. So the issue here, this is a really hopeful sign, because politics is downstream from culture, and culture is downstream from religion. So culture matters, and culture matters in a deeper way than politics ever does. So he's come on here as a cultural warrior, a social justice warrior, and he's gone onto this stage to ram his political opinion down the throats. Right? And one of the themes is, if you voted for Brexit, it's because you're stupid, and things like this. And so these suggestions were made, and he died on his arse, I think would be the way they would say it in Glasgow. But his reaction was to the audience, well, no, you're wrong. You should be finding this funny. You're wrong. So he then decided to, social justice warriors always double down. He then decided to double down. The Times wrote, if he hadn't already lost the room at the Grosvenor House in Mayfair at this point, Kumar, who was born in South London of Indian descent, provoked him further by playing the race card. He said it was always going to be dangerous to perform for a group of people largely descended from people who colonized my ancestors, before saying that some of the room were behaving like pricks. So how to endear yourself to your audience? And we'll leave aside any detailed analysis of the British Raj for the moment. But as the bread rolls flew at him following this, he refused to leave the stage, and he said, I'm not going anywhere. I'm full bear cow, absolute bear cow. I know you want me to leave, but I'm not going to do it. And he was finally escorted off the stage by one of the organizers. Now, you see here, the cultural programming isn't working. And it's a wonderful sight to behold.
And of course, David, this man is known as a BBC lovey.
Yes, well, the BBC loveys are the stock exchange value of a BBC lovey is falling very rapidly.
Okay, well, I think we're out of time there. David, thank you very much for joining us. We'll say if there is anybody from the Jewish community that's heard today's UK column news, we'd be very interested on feedback on this immensely important subject of anti-Semitism. And I'll just add that in the very early days of the UK column, probably talking about 10, 12 years ago, we did receive a visit from the police after writing an article about Israel and matters Jewish. Two lady constables turned up in plain clothes and said a complaint had been made. We asked if they'd read the article in question, and indeed one of them blushed and said no, she hadn't. The other one hadn't either. And we pointed out that we had received a letter from the public ourselves about the article, and explained that the letter had come from a member of the Jewish community who said it was one of the best articles on that particular subject they had read, at which point the police went away. But it shows you how powerful this sentiment is. So if you're Jewish, if you're out there, we would like to hear from you. We'll leave it there. Thanks very much for joining us. We will be back at the same time on Monday. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.